This video is for political science, American government, or constitutional law, if I ever get that course. Now, three things, or actually just two, because I don't think I'm sneezing as much. So two things. One, I'm in front of my nerd shelf. The things up here, I know you'll be judgmental about. I swear below is a bunch of policy books. That's one thing. Oh, and as always, I ran before I'm doing this video. Again, I need to stop doing that. And two, the other thing is the COVID-19 recommendation. And one of the things I notice when I go out to grocery stores is people on their cell phones. I saw a woman at Costco the other day, and she was FaceTiming her kid. Don't do that. You need to remember that when you come into the house from these public places, you can take off your shoes, take off the, put the clothes in the hamper, put the mask and stuff at the door. But out of all the things you take out with you to those stores, the cell phone is the thing that you carry around the most behind the scenes in your home. And the reason why I'm telling you that is you should try not to get it contaminated or anything like that. So when I go out to the grocery stores, once I'm about to suit up and put the mask on and the gloves, the cell phone goes into the pocket and does not come out until I get home and when I can safely decontaminate everything. And the reason why I tell you that is because people are forgetting that fact that you are bringing home your stuff, and the thing that you carry around the most at home could possibly get contaminated. If you take your phone out while you're at the store, you need to make sure you wipe it down. It's in all that stuff. But again, the cell phone, I just wouldn't bring it out if I were you. Okay, enough of that stuff. Let's get started on today's thing. Today is about the Supreme Court and the Bill of Rights specifically. And I want to first start off by saying I am not too happy with John Mulaney right now. Yeah, I'm not too happy about it because he did something I expected no one to ever do. And that was, he made a joke about the Third Amendment of the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And that was a little bit too much for me because I know I've been talking about the Third Amendment for years now and the importance of it. And I know I'm like the only person who does. Because no one talks about the Third Amendment. And there's a reason why, and we'll get into that for a second. But now my great fear is when I'm in class talking about the importance of the Third Amendment and why it is important, now I'm afraid that people are going to be quoting that joke to me. He did it on Saturday Night Live, and I was on the couch, literally just dumbstruck that someone was making jokes about the Third Amendment. So I expect to hear that joke thrown at me for a considerable amount of time. Enough about that. Let's talk about why the Third Amendment is probably one of the most important amendments of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I know that sounds weird. If you don't know the Third Amendment off the top of your head, trust me, a lot of people don't. I'm one of those people, by the way. I'm not some, I don't remember all of them off the top of my head like that and can say them verbatim. I always, before I talk, I always double check them and so forth. So the Third Amendment, and it's something you're supposed to remember because it's part of the Constitution test in middle school, I believe it was. And then, of course, U.S. history courses. The Third Amendment is about quartering the soldiers. And I know that sounds not important, and it isn't. In fact, when John Mulaney made the joke, he was pointing out how unimportant that amendment is. And considering that the First and the Second and the Fourth are so important, why do I consider the Third Amendment one of the most important amendments of the Constitution? Because it's a time capsule. You see, there's a lot of people out there who go, well, I know the original intent of the framers, of the writers of the Constitution. I know the founders, the whatever word fits with their political perspective. I know what the people who wrote the Constitution, what they were thinking at the time. But how do you? Because a lot of these amendments, that we have in the Constitution because of court rulings, because of laws, because of changes, even in later amendments. There's different interpretations of them. The Second Amendment is the best example because for almost over 200 years, there was like one perspective of it, and then until recently did that perspective and the change with the courts. So how does anyone know the original intent of the framers, the founders, the writers, whatever keyword you want to use for them? The Third Amendment. The Third Amendment, to me, I'm not saying it's the most important, but in regards to when people talk about the original intent, what they wanted to do, the Third Amendment is a time capsule for it. Now, I've already talked about in class, and I want to remind people here in case the video and so forth, because of the situation. When you're talking about the original intent of the Constitution and what the Constitution means in the writings, of course, what the Constitution says, what writing of the authors, other laws that they passed at the time, or other parts of the Constitution. And then third is, of course, the reflective writings of the authors at that time. Because those folks, they did like to write and talk a lot and have other people write it down for them too as well. So there is lots of those three out there. But the Third Amendment has a special place because it literally has not been challenged. I mean, there has been little things here and there, but for the most part, it's never been a thing. You can look at the history of the Third Amendment, and there is none. No, there's not really nothing. There's no major Supreme Court decision, lower court rulings. There's never been any laws written and pertaining to the Third Amendment, and it's never been having to be enforced. The U.S. military never tried to quarter their soldiers on people's property. Anyway, anything where it's been, like I said, reinterpreted, interpreted by the courts, rulings, laws pertaining to it, it has just been stuck in time. And that's the important thing about the Third Amendment. Because you have to ask, why did they write it in the first place? If it's something that's so unimportant. Because there's a lot of people out there who talk about the founders of this country being these wise sage folks who plan hundreds of years ahead, while the Third Amendment shows that it wasn't like that. This is not an issue that pertains. Now, the reason why the Third Amendment is important as a time capsule is reflects why the Bill of Rights were written. They're in response to British rule. They're in response to what they had to endure themselves. The Bill of Rights was the writers, the framers, the founders, whatever keyword you want to use, the authors, to tell the states, specifically the states, that they don't have to worry about British rule reoccurring again or anything like it. And the quartering of soldiers, because they were creating a military, a unified military. They were creating this with the U.S. Constitution. One of the reason why the Constitution, they were telling the colonies, or now the states, you don't have to worry about that. And that was what the Bill of Rights is. It is a reflection of what they had to endure with British rule, and it would never occur again. So when you think of the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and all that, it's a religion. Again, separation of church and state. The British rule had a state church. When you talk about the Fourth Amendment, and a lot of the Bill of Rights has to deal with punishments and so forth. What they had to endure on themselves, and from British rule. Of course, the third, their property was seized. And so why is this important? Well, going back to amendment I talked about earlier, the Second Amendment. Oh, this is not going to be fun. the Second Amendment, if you look at what the British did with them in guns, now people are talking about weapons were confiscated by the British towards the start or around or during the Revolutionary War. You are correct. But everything beforehand, and for most of the life of the colonies, the British loved the colonists to have weapons. French Indian War, protecting the property and so forth. But the one thing they would not let them do is raise those rifles in a militia. In fact, if you want to look at language that is similar to the Second Amendment, you can actually find it in the articles that creates the United States military. Similar languages. And you can also find the writings of the authors of the Constitution and what they say about the Second Amendment. But you also have to think about the Third Amendment and how the Third Amendment and all the other amendments of the Bill of Rights reflect an idea and a thing that they were enduring from British rule and how they did not want it repeated. And just that basic idea that the Third Amendment confirmed by never being reinterpreted, never being changed, never being having a court decide, shows how important their reflection, what their remembrance of British rule was, and how the original intent of the Bill of Rights and those authors was more about that than any political group or anything and their idea of the original intent. It's a time capsule. On below in the discussion, think about the Bill of Rights or any amendments, of course, after that, and discuss how is a reflection on a response to what was occurring at the time it was authored. In your books, it has all the years that the amendments, when they were passed, and what was, and you can look at the basic American history and see what was the time and how it's a reaction to what was occurring or what was occurring before that amendment was passed.